Now, I want to move now to the Singaporeans who have lived in other cultures, right? So we have Han Shih, who is a journalist, a freelance journalist, yes, and who has been living in Hong Kong. So and he will reflect on what does it feel like to be a Singaporean in Hong Kong culture. And then we have Joyce Lau, who is a Singaporean, who lives and works in Seville in southern Spain, right? And what does it feel like to be? What kind of insights have you gained in understanding what you are as a Singaporean and also as a person living in Spain? And then finally, we have our Terry Su, right? Where's Terry? I don't see him.
Terry is away.
Anyway, Terry is a famous Singaporean, right? And he's living and working in Taiwan. And I hope he has not such a terrible experience with the recent earthquake, but I hope he will be able to tell us more about being a Singaporean in Taiwan. So over to you, Han Shih. Shoot.
Okay, hi. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. Let me introduce myself briefly on my overseas experience. I left Singapore to work in Beijing in December 2001, and I lived in Beijing for 2002. Then in early 2003, I moved to Shanghai. And then after working in Shanghai for several months, I moved to Hong Kong in late 2003. So I've been in Greater China for, I would say, about 23 years, and I've been in Hong Kong for about roughly 21 years. What really struck me in my 21 years living in Hong Kong is that Hong Kong is very much a laissez-faire and bottoms-up place. This was a deliberate policy of the British colonial rule that continued in Hong Kong after Hong Kong returned to China under the one country, two systems. And one of the most graphic examples of a bottom-up initiative is the Rugby Sevens, which is happening right now. Right now in a stadium near my home in Hong Kong, there's nearly sold out 40,000 tickets for a stadium near my home in Hong Kong to watch the Rugby Sevens. And I think, in my opinion, the Rugby Sevens is a huge contrast between Singapore and Hong Kong. The contrast is that you have a minister of Singapore, Edwin Tong, going overseas and offering Taylor Swift millions of US dollars to come and sing in Singapore. So it's a very top-down approach. The Singapore government gets foreign stars like Taylor Swift to sing in Singapore for millions of dollars. But in contrast, the history of the Rugby Sevens is very bottom-up among the people living in Hong Kong. Rugby Sevens began in Hong Kong in 1976 when a group of expatriate rugby players, which are mostly white or British, just decided to start a seven-a-side international rugby tournament. And they got some some locally based multinational banks and multinational companies. I mean, they're Western companies, but they have offices in Hong Kong to sponsor and finance the Rugby Sevens. And in the early years, it was most or all of the rugby players were white. But, in subsequent years, you get a lot more Chinese. And then the Rugby Sevens is an international event. So you get people of all colors from different parts of Asia Pacific and the world playing, like New Zealand, Pacific Island people, etc. And now the general consensus is the Rugby Sevens in Hong Kong is the best and most important and most famous Rugby Sevens in Hong Kong. Singapore also has the Rugby Sevens, but if I'm not wrong, I think Singapore Rugby Sevens is copying the Hong Kong Rugby Sevens, and it came much later. But Hong Kong is by far the most important and the most famous Rugby Sevens in the world. So this is an example of a bottom-up initiative. I mean, local rugby players deciding to start the Rugby Sevens without any sponsorship or money from the Hong Kong government, and getting their friends who work in banks and multinational companies to sponsor it. There's a certain amount of element of so the big question is, why can't Singapore do that? Why can't Singapore grow their local timber get some Singaporeans to start some football or rugby or basketball or badminton tournament and make it world famous so that, players of that sport from all over the world will flock to Singapore and become a world-class event. And, lots of people pack the stadiums, and after the stadiums, they go to the bar district to enjoy themselves and party. And I also think this is good in a way for reducing rugby sevens, in my opinion, is a good way of reducing the divide between expats and locals and the races. Because obviously in 1976, rugby sevens was started up by, white British players. I think they're British, or maybe they're Australian in New Zealand as well. But, they're Western and they're white in Hong Kong. But it became such a local event. So this barrier between the racial divide, white and Asian, white and Chinese, local and foreign, broke down. I mean, rugby sevens in Hong Kong is very much now a local event. So similarly, if you say you get a bunch of, say, white expats in Singapore or Indian expats in Singapore or mainland Chinese expats in Singapore, and they decided to start a local event in Singapore, it can put Singapore on the world map and make Singapore world famous. And the barrier between the expatriates, wherever they come from, whether it's China or Europe or India, and the locals will break down. And that's a good way of removing xenophobia and the tension, because there are large numbers of Indian IT and banking executives coming to Singapore, and a large number of mainland Chinese and rich mainland Chinese coming to Singapore. Some of them are very wealthy in an honest way, and some of them were very wealthy in a dishonest way, and they laundered money and they bought good class bungalows, and now they're arrested and charged in court. I mean, what I'm trying to say is, I'm against xenophobia and racism, but the behavior of such rich mainland Chinese or an influx of large numbers of Indian nationals, and I don't approve of xenophobia, just on the record, might stir up possible xenophobia among some Singaporeans. But when you have, say, these expats, if they put their roots in Singapore and they start a homegrown event in Singapore that puts Singapore on the world map, that will reduce and destroy the divide between the locals and the foreigners. I want to raise another point of another example of bottom-up initiative in Hong Kong. Right now, Xi Jinping has designated the Greater Bay Area, so it means it's a top-down initiative from the top leader in Beijing. The Greater Bay Area comprises of, Hong Kong, the southern part of Guangdong province near Hong Kong and Macau. But actually, long ago, even as early as British colonial rule in the 1990s, after Deng Xiaoping reformed the Chinese economy, from the 1990s onwards, Hong Kong entrepreneurs flocked from Hong Kong to their neighboring villages and towns in Guangdong province, which is like 2, 3, 4 hours away by car. And then they contacted their cousins and uncles in these towns and villages in Guangdong province and set up factories to produce toys or clothing for export to America and Britain. And that made Guangdong an export powerhouse, exporting a lot of their goods through the ports of Shenzhen and Hong Kong. This was very much a bottom-up driven experience. And it made Hong Kong, although the place of Hong Kong as the world's business port has really dropped a lot, Shenzhen is still very important, and Guangdong in general, including Hong Kong, is a very important manufacturing and export hub, producing much of the world's goods. It means you can argue that it's still the factory of the world. So, and this was created by the ingenuity of Hong Kong entrepreneurs. And again, there's all these family and racial ties, They visited their uncles and their cousins in towns and villages in Guangdong province, and they spoke the sub-variant of the Cantonese dialect in those towns and villages, which may even differ from the Cantonese spoken in Hong Kong. And they got along together. So the big question I want to ask Singapore is on this level: can the Singaporeans, go and meet up with their friends or uncles or cousins in Johor and Batam Island and Bintan Island and set up factories in those places as entrepreneurs from a bottom-up experience? And how much does the racial issue matter? Like, Singaporeans have Malays, Chinese, and Indians, and Malaysia has Malay, Chinese, and Indians in different proportions, and Indonesia is mostly, Indonesians. I mean, is it going to affect, is it going to make it more difficult for Singaporean entrepreneurs to just go to, say, Batam or Bintan or Johor to set up factories? I mean, in the 1990s, Lee Kuan Yew said Singapore must have a second wing and expand beyond Singapore. And Goh Chok Tong created the Sijori concept, which is factories in Singapore, Johor, and I think the Riau Islands, which includes Batam. But these are top-down initiatives, just like Xi Jinping's Greater Bay Area is a top-down initiative. We need the bottom-up initiative, Singaporeans going across. So will they be able to blend well with the Malaysians and in Johor and Indonesians in Batam? Will they find any common ground, that, once upon a time under British colonial rules, Singaporeans and Malaysians are one, even though they're Malay, Chinese, Indians, and Eurasians. Whereas in Hong Kong, the racial ties are so close, they're almost like cousins, sub-clans within the sub-variant of the Cantonese dialect group. So the question is, in both cases, the rugby sevens and the manufacturing in the Pearl River Delta or the Greater Bay Area, it's a bottom-up initiative by Hong Kong people. And it's also part of the deliberate policy of the British government, which continues with the Hong Kong government today. I mean, in Singapore, if a government likes a concept like Taylor Swift or a trendy new factory, the Singapore government will, send a minister overseas and offer millions and millions of dollars for that entrepreneur or that singer to come to Singapore to sing or set up a factory. But or have a world-class conference like the IMF or the World Bank Forum. But in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong government might send one or two big shot senior leaders to give a speech, but all the funding and the organization is largely left the private initiative. The Hong Kong government doesn't get involved as much as the Singapore government. So these are things to think about. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Han Shih. And I think your most important point is the difference between Hong Kong and Singapore is the bottom-up approach in Hong Kong and the top-down approach in Singapore. And this has generated very different kinds of political culture as well as human culture, And your question about, can Singaporeans find their relatives and their friends in the region and do business with them? And I think that is a very important question which we have to explore. And in some of our earlier videos, particularly the Singapore, the future, right? The part 3 of the 3-part series, Singapore's past, present, and future. I have already suggested that money is not a problem. Singapore is a super rich country. We can raise trillions of dollars and we can invest in the region in a big way or in a small way as we prefer. But we may be lacking the kind of initiative and the savvy which a top-down political system has engendered. Whereas in Hong Kong, the bottom-up political culture, right, has actually generated a lot of entrepreneurship among Hong Kong people. So this is a very important question, which I think we need to look at, particularly in the context of the network of connections that Singaporeans have, not only with Singapore, but also with other parts further away, right? So now I'd like to turn to Joyce, who has done precisely that, right? She's a Singaporean and she's working creatively in a Western country, in Spain. So over to you, Joyce.
Hola, first of all. Yeah. So in Spain, everything is very relaxed. Thank you, Professor Tay, for inviting me to share some experiences. And happy to hear all the experiences that people have shared. I'm very, very Singaporean. I grew up, studied all the way in Singapore until 33 years old. My father was a Chinese educated, so he was initially communist during the time that Baji was talking about, and then after that, he was with Ditlem, a foreign company. So he's a self-made entrepreneur. So I grew up in a very business-like, the 70s and 80s, which is very happening in Singapore. Everybody gets comfortable, and then so we are comfortable, and I remember 1984 that we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of National Building, and we are standing, the total defense and all the stuff. So I grew up in that era where totally thankful to Lee Kuan Yew, totally everything. I was in the AEP, the art elective program. Everything is booming. We had piano lessons, art lessons. I was studying until Liu Kang, and finally so my life is very smooth. I became an architect. I worked in Singapore for 10 years. qualified architect. And finally, when I got married, my ex-husband was not happy with Singapore because it's too restricted, which I didn't understand. At that point in time, I have no idea what freedom is about. I don't know why outsiders are criticizing Singapore. So I mean, I'm sharing all this as a personal identity of where I am and how from outside and inside we are seeing how Singapore is progressing. So I always feel the need to speak up and protect Singapore because this is really where I came from. It is me until, I mean, all the way until now. That's why I'm also still sharing at this point. So after 33 years old, I went to Dubai, stayed there for 15 years, worked there. In Dubai, I was in the Singapore Business Council. I was representing Singapore. I was interacting with all the Singapore consulates, trying to, again, share with people what Singapore is about. So as far as I know, Singaporeans, when they are outside of Singapore, is nothing about race anymore. We always introduce ourselves as Singaporean Chinese, Singaporean Indian, Singaporean Malay, and then we exchange ideas. We always like to share to tell people what Singapore is about, that we are very educated, we are like, super efficient, and we can do and deliver anything you want us to do. So you have all the values of the Asian culture, and at the same time, you have this willingness to share. So I was very happy outside because you outside of Singapore, because you do have the freedom, like what Han Shih was talking about. You have the freedom. Nobody is going to suppress you. It's going to judge you. You are regarded very high because Singaporean is very regarded highly outside due to Lee Kuan Yew and due to the fact that we are really so effective as a nation. But the thing is that we have our flaws because for myself especially, because of my Confucius upbringing, because my father, and because of Lee Kuan Yew as well. So there's this beholding, this inertia to be involved, to actually participate or get loud or vocal, because you're afraid that if you say something much more, you get sort of sidelined. So again, the groupings, the groups that we're talking about, the social identity, that the different kind of religion, different racial groups, we sort of, it will set you on a different hierarchy, right? Not so much in Singapore because we are we're sort of like after the 70s where the housing board is putting everybody together and we're playing with neighbors so happily. We don't have that much of a problem. We grew up without any idea much of a racial segregation. But when you're outside the country, you start seeing people identifying themselves as back to their roots, as what Sarafan's saying, because that makes them special, especially unique. And when you're more unique than another person, then you can relate much better to somebody else. It's the kind of thing that helps us to, again, integrate and form this global network. So this is one thing aside of the fact that when we are outside your comfort zone, all the dilution of the group defenses sort of dilutes. You sort of reach out. Nothing is not so protective, not so important anymore. And so you have the freedom to do things more creative. But on the other hand, now I'm going back to my personal story. So I left, I went to Dubai. My children has an identity crisis now. So they grew up in Singapore until 3 years old, and one is 1 year old, and they left to Dubai. They studied full-time in Dubai. When they introduce themselves, they don't know what to say because the father is a Persian, mother is a Singaporean Chinese, and they were born in Australia, born in Singapore, and they are fully growing up culturally in Dubai, which is a multicultural, multi-racial society. So they have nothing. They have no roots. So in fact, before this meeting, I was asking my son, who is now 22 years old, he's in Australia, Melbourne. I said, what would you see yourself? What is the definition of Eurasian? And I said, he was saying, it's where your home or somebody who will accept you as the first priority. So your home. So I'm a Singaporean because I know that's where they will accept me at the end of the day, right? So my son is Australian because he decided to go to Australia because Singapore refused to accept him because his father refused him to come back and do his NS. So that is another issue altogether. So he is born in Singapore, but he's not able to step in now. And I'm very sad because the reason why he didn't have to be a Singaporean, he was born in Australia. And because I'm such a staunch nationalistic Singaporean, I signed him up as a Singaporean. So I locked him in when he was a baby to being a Singaporean citizen, which he chose to refuse it at the age of 12 years old. So that is a political decision. That is, again, a national identity that we have an issue, or rather, I personally think that should lead on or should progress on. Because at the end of the day, now with our technology, with our timeline, with the progression of our society and the world, we are a globalized world, you know? So I think my takeaway or my thing that I want to really come across today is that everywhere is good. It's where your heart is, and it's where you can convey the values of humanity, of sharing and caring. And the fact that you're educated, you are receptive, you're open-minded to learn from everybody. So it's important to have my roots. I mean, I feel so comfortable because I have Singapore, but I'm not so comfortable because I'm a Chinese or a Peranakan or anything, because, well, my father is a Chinese, but he's a Chinese is born in Singapore. So there's not much of roots there except for the cultural Chinese New Year, which I still practice. Every year, myself, whichever I'm in Dubai, in Spain, every year I still do the Chinese New Year things. I call my parents, I do all the Chinese New Year displays and decorations, and I treated all my colleagues to Chinese New Year food. But it's become a personal identity. So for the next generation, for the next, the people who are out there now, the young, the millennium, the Z, Generation Z that we're talking about, what is this identity, the racial or the cultural identity? How can we, secure them? Because like what Baoji was telling, they have no values. They have no values because they refuse to participate in our cultural rituals and traditions. They just don't care because they are now so much with the Western world or the outside world that why would they want to do something that nobody else is doing or minority is doing? Because it's no longer insular. They are just so out there, So thinking of things to be creative and from the ground up, what Han Shih is saying is because the atmosphere of Hong Kong is all along welcoming, inclusive. There's no laws, there's no rules. But on the other hand, in Singapore, it's so good to be, in a way, controlled, because control, you bring the standard of everybody up. You give everybody a very comfortable shelter, an environment, and also a basis of self-confidence. This is important. But we're talking about what is the next step for our young ones. Just the other day, someone was sharing about this article of this 31-year-old Ashish Kumar, right? That he retired, he's a Cambridge guy, very highly educated. So when I saw this, I was immediately, first of all, my impression is like, it's good. It's really good because somebody dares to do something out of the norm, right? But on the other hand, it's like, oh wow, next generation so comfortable, too comfortable. Then where is this drive? Where is this, this push to want to do things for the betterment or the improvement of our tiny nation? We are such a tiny nation, right? So people, it's very important. So where are these people, like young generation, who is going to push for it, and not us here who has sort of like, oh, I'm 53 years old, where am I going to retire? It's like we are retiring in a way. I mean, of course, I still have 50 years, but it's just the reason why I'm really interested in our future is that I feel that Singapore at the moment is getting more and more comfortable and insular. Like they do not feel comfortable to engage with the world, not ready to engage with the world and to debate or to participate. it's happy to be just, as long as I have my great passport, I can travel anywhere I want, and be able to feel proud that we are rich. We're so rich, we can do anything we want. But compared to Dubai, compared to Saudi Arabia, the drive, the zest, the passion, it's sort of not, or rather, maybe I'm outside. Maybe I'm outside, I'm not feeling the passion inside.
Well, thank you very much, Joyce. And I think it's very interesting to hear both you and of course Han Shih. Actually, both of you are reflecting on the kind of the implications of a top-down political culture. That in spite of the fact that you both have very strong affinity to Singapore, especially you, Joyce, you feel very much of your roots are in Singapore, even though you have vast international experience, and your children are also all over outside of Singapore. In fact, you said that your son doesn't even want to be a Singaporean. So this is the question which I think will require a lot more discussion. What is actually happening to the young Singaporean? And in fact, all the speakers that we have tonight are all older people. So we really have a strong sense of being Singaporean. The question that really is bugging us is, what about the young people, right? So now we have a slightly younger person, right, Terry, in Taiwan. So you survived the earthquake. Now tell us about what is it like to be there.
Yeah. So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can, right? Okay. So, first of all, thanks for having me here on this panel, with all the other speakers, and being the last speaker on the panel. So, on the earthquake, yeah, I'm now living in Taoyuan. So I felt the earthquake,
Wow,
and it
Taoyuan.
basically woke me up on that morning itself. It was really that bad. But luckily, I think after the 1999 earthquake, which was of the similar magnitude, buildings in Taiwan that do not comply with the standard or not up to that standard would have actually collapsed back then. So after that, all the buildings in Taiwan would have to comply with very rigorous and very strict regulations and standards, and therefore you would so apart from the buildings that are in Hualien, which is the closest to the epicenter that have you see structural damages. All the other buildings in other cities were relatively actually left unharmed, or basically without any harm at all. So yes, so okay, this year I'm 42, so probably I'm the youngest in this lot. So I probably would bring in a different so-called view in this. I'm a third generation Singaporean Chinese, meaning my father was born in Singapore. It was my grandfather that came from grandparents that came from China, which is Hainan. So personally, I do not have any ties with China, personal ties with China. So my personal longing would be in Singapore. This is where I would believe to be my home. But of course, currently I joined the Hong Kongers who are now being displaced from Hong Kong and now in Taiwan. I think hundreds of them, if not thousands, based in Taiwan, who are fearing prosecution from the China government. For me, you know who. So I given that I'm in Taoyuan, right, I think it's interesting to note that over here there's a huge concentration of foreigners. You're talking about Philippine, Indonesians, Thais. These are people who are here working in the factories that are in the industrial area in Taoyuan. So surrounding me, there's a lot of food shops that basically sell this type of food, and which is why I chose this area, because I get access to all the Asian foods. As compared, let's say if I were to say somewhere else, right, the only food I can get would be Taiwanese Chinese food. which goes back to the point that in Singapore culture, I think by and large, a lot of it is really centered around food rather than you're talking about like practices. Going to what say Joyce was mentioning about the Chinese New Year, even for my generation, I think Chinese New Year has come to be it's just simply a long weekend rather than a holiday that you would really spend your time with your family. I think in Singapore, a lot of people nowadays they are more closer to their friends, right? As friends, colleagues, as compared to their family. The sense of kinship isn't that much strong nowadays. And really, we have to ask ourselves, should Singapore culture be linked with race or race or religion? Definitely, that's your festive. But when it comes to culture, is it race based? Because when it comes to race, right, it's really getting a bit pointless at this point. Why I say that? You look at the national statistics. 70% of the marriages nowadays are inter-ethnical. Then 33% of I'm talking about the stats last year. 33% of the marriages are transnational. So you put all together, right? I think probably half of the whatever marriages or the kids that come out are are transnational, are inter-race. So but Singapore, for the sake of for the sake of doing it, they would still have a race there. So you will have people who are like 1/4 Chinese, 1/4 Malay, 1/4 Japanese, 1/4 German, and then eventually the parent would have to decide what race to actually put it in. And this goes back to the point on and this is the point of what the other speakers actually has been pointing out. I think really a lot of the views on the race, right, is a bit in the 80s, 90s mindset where the race in Singapore is really still largely quite defined. But currently in Singapore, gradually you're seeing races being so mixed, so diverse, that we shouldn't be actually talking about race. In fact, we should be talking about really doing away with this this idea of having a CMIO model, and also touching on what Grace pointed out on the nationality. I think in Singapore, they at one point it wants to be like open to the international community, but at another point it wants the Singaporean to feel the sense of loyalty to the country, which is why Singaporeans you bind the Singaporeans to this national service, and then you would control its freedom, his or her freedom, and frankly, as a foreigner, you will have it better where you can be a PR, but at the same time hold another citizenship at the same time. So you have the best of two worlds. So like in Joyce's case, let's say if the son, if the nationality wasn't registered at the very beginning, he could have come in as an Australian and then got a PR subsequently, right? And then everyone will be happy. But it's because I think Singaporeans really there are many Singaporeans who are that loyal, that feel so strongly in terms of putting all they have for the country, which is why they don't really think of a back road. I mean, they don't think of loopholes or think of back road. They will just do whatever they want. Sorry, they do whatever it takes in order to show their loyalty or to contribute in one way or another for the country. And which is why I believe, right, we should really be looking whether or not Singapore should allow dual citizenship. In fact, I believe a lot of the rich have dual citizenship, whether is it, say, the Cayman Island, whether is it the US citizenship for some, like you take, I think the wife and sons of Yaqub Ibrahim. So I believe the son and the wife had US citizenship, but after the big Hua, after he stepped down, no one pursued to ask whether or not have the son given up the US citizenship, or they just simply what's that hoping that no one actually will follow up on that. Yes. So I think I would just want to end off. I think from a Taiwanese point of view, from where I am in Taiwan, I think a lot of Taiwanese want to reach out to the international community. They want to actually walk out from Taiwan because of the lower wages, the lack of what's that the lack of growth in various careers, but because their language is the language in which they are well versed in is in Mandarin. So unless they go to China to develop their career, which basically it's quite hard given the current political climate, they would find very hard to go to elsewhere around the world because they are basically only versed in Mandarin, and the Mandarin that they have is we're talking about traditional Mandarin, and this reflects back to Singapore. Singaporeans advantages or strength over the years, over the past few decades, has always been that we are well versed in English along with our mother tongue. But however, this advantage apparently, if you have been speaking with the younger generation, has been slowly dwindling, in which a lot of families simply focus on their English, and many just simply take mother tongue for the sake of or take mother tongue, which is dabble with mother tongue simply for the sake of taking an examination, and after schooling they will just simply forget about the matter. And this simply disregard discard the kind of advantages that we used to have, a Singaporean workforce used to have when they go to other countries. And I want to touch on this point because it's what was that Han Shih actually pointed out in terms of the excess of race, like the recognition of ancestry, etc. Imagine if I'm a Hokkien descendant, I go back to Hokkien and say that Fujian, and say that I'm actually from here. My grandfather was from here, and therefore I would like to actually settle down here, etc. It makes no makes no difference, right? If I say I'm a descendant of that place, but yet I speak little or none of the dialect and or even Mandarin. So I think what we should be more focused on is really more of the command of language rather than say talking about what race we are, where's our ancestry and whatnot. I think this we should really refocus on the command of language as what we had, or embrace the diversity of language as what our first generation pioneers in Singapore had done, which is why they succeeded, and not allow the society as what we have today degenerate to a single language society, and to be worse, most of whom actually have the language really, I would say in casual term, half bucket water. So I think I just end off my point, my reflections in terms of what I have here in Taiwan, and aligning it with what I feel would actually matter most to actually Singapore.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Terry. I'm glad you survived the earthquake. Yeah, and you also survived your exile from Singapore. I think now we are moving to the stage where I think there are some questions coming in from the audience and also among the panel. Right, feel free to ask each other questions as well. Right, so I'll hand it over now to Alfred to moderate the question process.
Yeah,
Alfred.
so the first question is from Mr. W. Wong, and I think both Terry and Joyce covered this, but maybe they want to go more in depth. With more cross-ethnic marriages, how will the future Singaporeans see their heritage? Or to put it another way, how much of the culture or their heritage would impact the younger Singaporeans? What do you guys think?
I don't know. I gave a talk at the NTU about the regionalization of Singapore's finances as well as our business into the region, particularly our northern neighbor as well as our southern neighbor. And I asked the students who were there, how many of you speak Malay? None. Yeah. So I advise them, if you are going to have a future in Malaysia or Indonesia, you better start learning Malay now. So this is a language issue, Yeah. And I think Terry made the point about, I'm not sure what you're actually driving at, but if you are Hokkien and you go back to Fujian and you can't speak Hokkien, would you be able to do some kind of deal or some kind of business connection or some kind of a communication with the people in Fujian province? So this is a language, culture, and communication issue, right? So what? So I think somebody else mentioned that Singapore actually has a multiple language culture, right, in the past, and maybe that is drifting away. So maybe it has to be
Rekindled.
resuscitated.
Yeah.
Would you like to comment about that, Terry?
Yeah, so if you were to ask the young generation now, I think most people would be more interested in celebrating, I wouldn't say celebrating, celebrating some Japanese cultural event or Korean so-called heritage event as compared to what we have. This is the problem here that Singapore has. Singapore does not have soft power. Singapore have no, say, cultural stuff in which it extenuate its influence to our surrounding neighbor. Instead, what we are actually simply subjected to all sorts of influence. Taylor Swift, for example, we do not have our own cultural basis, in which is why you have Chinese, Malays, Indians, etc., all subscribing to K-pop because we do not have a cultural identity of our own. So it's not that they are they value they value, say, Korean culture more than what their own ethnicity is. It's just that we do not have an environment or society in which we help to portray to push for this the beauty or the essence of this culture to the younger generation, because you can see, despite the government's insistence that or is doing all it can to try to promote the culture, but it's really just or put it plainly say wayang, because you don't. Yes, please. Would you like to add anything, Sally?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry. Am I? Will you finish?
No.
finish
It's
your-
fine. It's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
It's fine.
Okay. I just want to add a bit. Okay. Well, when it comes to culture, when it comes to language, I think you all have to go back to the primitive drawing board, which is our family tree. So as parents, you have to start doing a family tree and put it on some place in your room or your home to show your children that this is our family tree. Okay, this is what I did to my family, and this is what my dad did to us when I was a little boy. So every time when I want to go to bed, or when I want to go for my prayers at home, I will look at the family tree and I will ask, who is that? Who is that? Who is that? They all sound very alien because half of them are dead. Now, this family tree actually will bring back to your roots. Wherever you are, whatever you do, whichever place you are in the world, but if there is a family tree at home, it will actually root you down to the names. So family tree will root us to our forefathers. Our forefathers were the ones who actually practiced culture. Okay, like when I heard Joyce, has this mixed, as the son has mixed blood, mixed race. Probably Joyce, you can start the family tree. You can show who's the father, who's the mother, who's the grandfather, who's the grandmother, and their races. Then they'll question, am I related to the Hokkien? Am I related to the Dutch? Because for me, my mom has a Dutch and Hokkien blood. So I'm 1/4 Hokkien, 1/4 Dutch, and half Bugis. So I kept asking, where is that Dutch family? And I start to do I investigate, I interrogate that particular name, and I got almost like 400 people of that, from that name, the Dutch family name, which I've not published or not shared yet. But it all started from a family tree. So from the family tree, I know my culture. From the family tree, I know what we practice. And I realized that the Bugis don't eat ketupat or rice, they eat something else. And whenever there is a chance for me to give a talk or make an exhibition in Singapore, I will have all this odd culture display in front for the public to see. And that's why they say that, this is the Bugis culture. This is how they eat. This is their language. And I'm trying to reclaim all this identity back to Singapore. Okay, so when I did my book is not just about myself, but it's actually a template for everyone of any race, any religion, or any ethnic community, just to fill in the blanks and remove my name.
Actually, Sarafian, there are two questions that arise from what you say. The number one question is that, and I want to put this to everybody, including our people who join in from to this discussion. Is the family structure in Singapore still strong, or have the younger people maybe have lost interest in family as such? That's number one question. Number two question is that I want to ask you the question, Sarafian. Being you have revived your Bugis identity, what does it mean that it is possible for you to communicate more clearly with and more intimately with the Bugis in Sulawesi? That's a question. And I think the same question applies to everybody on this panel, right? Does it mean that because you are, let's say at Edmund, because you're Peranakan, does it mean that you are more able to, say, communicate with the Peranakan in Indonesia or in Malaysia or in China, as you suggested, and so on, right? So the issue of language and culture, right? And Singapore is a kind of multicultural location. We have people from all over the world, and a lot of money here. Does our multiracial family system, and as well as our multicultural exposure, linguistically and so on, enable us to really expand our influence and our activities way beyond this little red dot? This is a question for everybody.
The first question is can you repeat the first question again, Professor?
Is the family structure in Singapore still strong?
Yes, it's still strong. It's just.
What about the others? What do they think?
Yeah.
Okay, can I try answering it?
Richard Ho, you're shaking your head. What do you think?
Okay. Okay.
Actually, we have a lot of items on our mind, and we are not listing down the items and discussing the item individually. We're crowding ourselves with all the items together, and it is very confusing. And some of the ideas or situation that we have described become very conflicting. We have to actually identify the individual item that we want to talk about. Now, when you talk about this family thing, whether the family is wrong, you know, the focus is that number one item in their mind is hand to mouth. They live hand to mouth. How can they ever focus about family? How can they ever eventually think about how to help one another? If you're on the plane, they say, when we are under decompression, first attend to yourself. Then you attend to the people next to you that you can help, or to the younger people or whatever. It's the same also with life. If you do not have some stability and something that you can count on or something extra, how can you offer? Now, you know about this thing about culture. Most people don't understand what is meant by culture. Culture is a way of life. You walk into a restaurant, it's a Chinese restaurant, you expect chopsticks. You expect to eat from a bowl. You expect to eat community eating, all right, sharing whatever was on the table. If you go to a Western restaurant, you have your individual meal and you use fork, knife, and spoon. If you go to maybe an Indian restaurant, you use your bare hands. You wash your hand, you use your bare hands, and you eat. Now, that is the practice of the way of life. And that way of life is suitable because of location and climate. In some location and some climate, they have to practice differently
You hear,
because,
right? Richard,
yes,
I think the important point you're making is that the strength of the culture and the family, right, depends on the economic welfare of that particular
no,
family.
it takes time to grow it.
That's right. If the family is very poor, right, they are living from hand to mouth, they are going to be, the family is going to be very fractured, right, as well as the cultural preferences and all that would be very difficult.
It's
So
not
this
up
is
to me
where
to
I
say,
think
sir.
I have to bring in CS Chong, right? Because CS, you made a very important point earlier on in your talk, no, about the dispossessed Chinese community within Malaya and Singapore, right? And that is the reason why that's why they were involved in a class struggle, in fact, right, to improve their economic conditions, right, and therefore they were prepared to sacrifice their life even to gain advantage. So these are in other words, the whole issue of discussion about culture, right, is related, as CS mentioned, it's related to the issue of economics. If the family is poor, it has different kind of perception. What do you think?
Can I yeah, can I talk? Okay, I think some months ago I met somebody who's living in Jurong. He was complaining to us that his children doesn't he's retired, he doesn't travel very much, stays at home most of the time. His children who is staying in Bishan doesn't bring his grandchildren to visit him very often because commuting by public transport takes a long time. So maybe he doesn't come once a week, maybe twice a week. No, twice a month and so on. Not as much as he would like, right? So because of the way our Singapore HDB flats breaks up extended families into nuclear families, the family structure would be very different from in the past. And then back to the other thing about what Richard bring up, wealth and let's say poverty. Yeah? So if you're living from hand to mouth, let's say for example, the person who's living in the person whose children is living in Bishan, he would have a lot of time spent working, and then during weekends he would have to probably ferry the children around to all kinds of various tuitions, right? But if you were to stay in, let's say, a very big GCB, right, which is worth millions of dollars, I think all the children would be there every week hoping to get a part of his inheritance. So this is what is happening in Singapore. A lot of it, like what Richard says, culture and family structure depends on the family background, family wealth, and so on.
Yeah. CS, if you are poor, you are going to live in a small flat in Singapore. If you are richer, you will have a larger flat. If you are quite well off, you will have a much bigger flat, and therefore you could even have your parents, your older parents, live with you, right? But if you don't have the economic means, you will be separated by long distances, and also your time spent in trying to make a living will curtail your family relationship. Correct?
I want to make a point, sir.
Yeah. Go ahead, Richard.
You cannot take a snapshot of our situation and say that that is what it is. Culture, whatever it is evolved over time, is nurtured. What we are hoping or what we're talking, we cannot know. If you are talking about education system, what you're educating the child today, the children today, you see at least 6 years later. You don't see it today. But what we are actually theoretically discussing is, we thought that all these things snapshot, and then we discuss it. No. You have to see the scenario at that time in the future and what you are nurturing. And then at the end of it, you reap your harvest.
No, you're right, Richard, because this particular forum that we are having, right, is a kind of an overview of the issues that we face, right? Later this year, we are going to have more detailed discussions on each of the topics that we have come across, right? So we are scattering all over the place right now. So I want to ask Han Shih this question. You see, what is the situation in Hong Kong? Are Hong Kong families, let's say of the lower middle class, what is their situation in Hong Kong families in low middle class? I also want to ask the same question to Terry, your experience in Taiwan. What is the family situation in Taiwan? And also, Joyce, what is the family situation in the part of Spain that you are living in, among the lower middle class? If you are talking about the upper class, that's a different situation altogether. It's a lower middle class, which in Asian societies is the bulk of people. And this is where the cultural part is very much impacted by economics. Okay, Han Shih.
Okay.
Professor Chen, can
Yeah.
I just answer this first?
Okay,
Because I
Joyce,
have
go ahead.
5 minutes. Yeah. I think in Spain, it's so family oriented. So in terms of the middle and the lower class, the family values is very strong. It's like our values in the 70s and 80s kind of thing. So every weekend people get together. So they don't feel poor. They don't feel poor because the network of support is just so integrated, and also everybody has a job of a minimum salary, and they live. If they don't have enough money, they actually live with their family still. So they do have some Asian value very strong. I mean, in Spain particularly, and in southern Spain, and also what happened is that the social welfare is really also very good. Like medical, it's literally for free. Of course, you have to queue up and everything. But I know in Singapore, even with my family or my children, sometimes when they go there, even if you go to polyclinic, you have to wait a long time, and it's not very direct. You do have to pay your money, you know. So as a result, people in Singapore don't readily go to see the doctors. It's that the social welfare is not that comfortable yet. You know, it's like government is feeding us a lot of cash, a lot of money into our CPF and things like that, a top up and everything, and people are happy generally and well provided for. But I think on the lower and middle class, to gain access to what you're entitled to is still a little bit of a red tape. It's still you need some application, you need some things. Whereas in Spain, it's like, if you don't have to work, you don't have to work, you know, and you know that you can still being taken care of, and everybody is so friendly, and it's very grounded people. It's not like a city people. I mean, from where I am in Seville, it's really because people are having land. They are very comfortable because they can eat off the land. You know, everything is self-sustainable. So most of my colleagues, they have family farms where they bring their eggs. Like for me, I bring my origins to the office. So it's a lot of sharing. And I think that the thing comes with, because the land is there, it's agricultural grounding, that people do not need to chase for the 5 C's. They're happy to just have a basic work. They work like concreters. My neighbors, You call them, they come, they do your concreting for you. I mean, we just built over here in the 5 years that I'm here, we built a swimming pool, you know, those like 20 meters and everything. It's just using neighbors, things around in the village. I don't have to go a contractor and things like that. It's everything, we do it ourselves.
Yes. So
So I would say,
the situation in Spain is a different kind of political system from that in Singapore. I believe also in Taiwan and in Hong Kong, right? Where we have a very a staunchly capitalistic model, whereas I think in Spain it's a more social democracy, right? Where you have
I mean,
more,
people depend on themselves, you know.
Yes.
I mean, in a way, like day-to-day things, they depend. They don't look to the government for help.
And also the
Self-reliant.
density in where you are is much lower, right? But whereas in Hong Kong the density is incredible, and so is also in Taiwan, and Singapore is very high. So okay, Han Shih, what is the family situation in Hong Kong, given the fact that it's very dense, and the what is the impact of on the lower income people on family life?
Sheer economy dictates that you know, if you're low income, low middle class in Hong Kong, lots of people will share one small flat. So in a certain sort of sense, you could say it creates kind of a family unity. You know, many people under one roof. And I know for a fact that even among more affluent Hong Kongers, you know, they visit, their parents might live separately from them, but they still keep up a lot of close ties with each other, you know, at dinners and lunches. You know, families eat together in restaurants a lot in Hong Kong. So the family ties are very strong.
Mm-hmm.
And in general, in Hong Kong, I find that the Confucian Chinese values is very, very strong. They keep at it more because of the usage of Cantonese. So they have a very deep Cantonese Confucian root. I mean, Lee Kuan Yew keeps talking a lot about Confucian culture, but you know, he just basically strongly discouraged the use of Chinese dialects, and he encouraged the use of English. So a lot of Singapore Chinese people have lost their Confucian roots. And the paradox is, Hong Kong people, even though they're very Confucian, have strong Confucian values, they believe in freedom of expression, press freedom, the right to demonstrate, a free press. They don't see it as contradictory to Chinese Confucian culture at all. And some of them want democracy. Lee Kuan Yew says democracy does not suit the Chinese character. But Hong Kong people are very Chinese and very Confucian, but you know, a number of them like democracy.
Yeah. Okay. So, Terry, what's the situation in Taiwan?
So you correct what Prof Tay just said in terms of Taiwan. In terms of social protection, right? I think it's very similar to what Joyce in Spain actually enjoy in terms of healthcare. Like even me as a foreigner, I stand to enjoy the universal healthcare in Taiwan. So even if I were to go and visit, in fact, I did visit the doctor for for heart issue, right? I paid much less. I think I paid about $50 for as a foreigner, for the consultation, for the consultation, for the test, for the medicine, right? Just $50 as a foreigner. And if I were to actually use if I had my card back then, my health insurance card back then, it will be free for me. So in terms of health per se, Taiwan has it very good. Don't have any issue with that. The only problem that they face will be on property, because in Taiwan, property, there's no such concept of 99-year property. All the properties are sold freehold. So therefore, a lot of people have given up hope buying buying property. They're just happy to just rent for their entire life. And frankly, there's no shortage of properties out for rent. So what we have here in Taiwan is that a lot of people are either choosing to become single, or they married but they don't have kids. So instead of having kids, they have pets instead. So because the thing here is income in Taiwan is not increasing much. So if you're actually from a middle income segment, you can earn enough to stay alive, but to have a family, to develop, to nurture a kid in an acceptable manner, many people will feel the pressure. So instead of contributing, joining in this rat race, they simply just say, okay, I'll just spend money to keep myself afloat and then go for my regular holidays. So this been the change of culture in that sense. The way the kind of life they pursue, very different from the 1890s, where the ideal is get married, have kids, then start your career. So it's a very
So
different.
this seems to be happening in all the developed countries, right? In Japan, in Korea,
Japan,
in
yes,
the
yes.
United States, in Europe.
I
It's the
think
same thing, right? Young people don't want to have children when they
Uh,
get married. Yeah.
I think the most important aspect here is that it's different from the start of the 80s 90s, where if I were to put in the effort, I know in the next 10 20 years, right, I can get myself in management, or I can see my income increase through my experience,
Yeah.
through my professionalism. But
Yeah.
now, right, it would appear that this, even if I were to work on the same job for 10 20 years, right, my pay would not change much. I think that's the same in Singapore. In fact, many would see their wages drop if you're not in the management level. So if you're in the middle income lower, you very likely that you will see your wage stagnant for decades, unless you're able to get out from that cycle. So
Yeah.
because of this, it's more efficient to just simply like keep a smaller family and then keep your expenses down.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. So, Edmund, I want to ask you from the Peranakan culture point of view, how strong is the Peranakan family structure?
Right. Thanks for the question. I mean, allow me to begin by publicly apologizing to Victor. I got no ill intention earlier to suggest that the Eurasians are not a race. But if the Peranakan community can also be acknowledged as a race, I think it'd be fantastic. We have similar construct. So, but um, I think for my family in particular, because we are still rather traditional, traditional meaning not older, I would rather suggest that if we have culture, if we have tradition, and we are still practicing them, it means that we are still relevant in terms of the cultural and the practices that we adhere and we hold dear to our way of life. So in terms of filial piety, mannerism, and how we greet ourselves, up to today, I think my children, I would still have them with the help of my wife to address their elders before they eat their meals. So they will say, Papa eat, Mama eat, Grandma eat, and every single one eat before they eat themselves. It really takes a lot of effort to ensure that traditions like this continues on. So if there's anything I can suggest, I think it really takes a lot of personal effort. But if anything else I can add on to it, which is not family or personal, it would be that I think Terry mentioned something very interesting. I think along the lines that, and I think some others earlier also mentioned something along the lines that we cannot fully depend on the government to provide us with the vision or the future that we could possibly dream for or dream of. We should not wait for that to happen. And if we can, perhaps we might just start with ourselves to effect any change. So I think there's no one to blame but ourselves for the decisions that we've made for ourselves. And I guess these are things that I can share that I think that are dear to me, and I think
Okay,
I was
thanks, Edmund. I think that we are coming very close to 9 o'clock where we have to end. Is there anybody who has an urgent comment to make right now? Because I would want to sum up pretty soon. Yeah.
I just want to add just to add on what like Prof Tay actually mentioned about the family structure, and also how the what's that the who was that saying? I think it was CS Chong was saying. Frankly, it is the wealth of a family that has to play when it comes to the integrity of the family structure, where frankly the poor families would would huddle within themselves, or they would just separate and then do whatever they want. Because to them, it's not to say bad character, but just simply saying that if they were to strike it off themselves, they will have life easier than to have family members rely on them for whatever kind of assistance. And in Singapore's context, right, Singapore government forces the family members to help each other. Take for example, if you have an aged father who has no source of income, the family service center would compel a middle income individual who is struggling to get by with the family to pay some form of assistance to the aging father. So this the families, it's not that the families don't like each other or they don't have good family ties, but the thing is the if they were to hang together, it's really who's going to rely on who when it comes to family assistance. Whereas for the more wealthy individuals, if they're all well-to-do, is then they benefit from each other's connection. They benefit from the family's inheritance. So to them, getting it together, it's really beneficial. But for the less well-off families to be together, it's really about who's going to suffer, because some people who can rely on another, but there will be some people who will have to actually struggle more to fend off the others. That's my
Prof, I think Richard want to say something.
Richard, I have only 3 minutes left, so I have to sum up, right? I think that this session, which was intended to discuss the issue of who we are, right, has had to cover the different so-called ethnic groups. I mean, even though we may disagree on any kind of firm definition of what is an ethnic group, but I think what came out from the discussion is a very important one, which is about the network of connections that Singapore has, not just within Singapore, but within the broader region around Singapore. So network economy, network social systems, network cultures, these are very important for Singapore. The other very big issue is about the top-down versus the bottom-up political culture, right? Which affects how people behave. It even affects the family structure, right? And I think there's an implied aspect to that, and that is the governance philosophy, right? The Singapore governance philosophy is totally against welfareism, right? Whereas I think in Spain there's a strong European idea of welfare state, the welfare state, and I think to some extent the Taiwanese democracy also has that. Welfareism, I think, does not exist in Hong Kong, right? Because it's a completely transactional capitalist market economy, right?
Not completely true. I think Hong Kong's health system is far more generous than Singapore.
Yes.
And public transport and utilities are much
Okay,
cheaper than
that
Singapore.
actually may well be a kind of a spin-over effect from the British national health system,
Yes.
right? Which the British introduced, and which once you introduce it, you cannot take it away because it has very serious political consequences, right?
Yeah.
Singapore was able to break away all of that, right? So Singapore is a purely market-driven social economy. Okay, so I think we have to come to an end for